I Chose My Son and Myself, a true story of maternal overcoming. When my son Daniel was born, the reality of motherhood was very different from what I imagined. I always thought that, upon becoming a mother, everything would be wonderful and peaceful. But in reality, I found myself overcome by a feeling of overwhelm. I didn't know if I was doing the right things, if I was caring for him appropriately. Every gesture, every choice felt like an immense responsibility, and I felt constantly anxious. I constantly thought, what if he's not okay? What if I make a mistake? I tried, but the pressure of being the perfect mother was overwhelming me. The worst part was that I didn't know who the perfect mother I was trying to be was. Internal pressure mixed with external expectations, and I felt like everyone was watching my actions, as if it were a major exam. Felipe, my husband, was there by my side, but he seemed to handle fatherhood much more calmly than I did. He wasn't fazed by the daily challenges and seemed more patient. I saw him interacting with Daniel naturally, and it made me feel like something was wrong with me. While he went about his daily routine with more ease, I was consumed by the anxiety of not being good enough. When he tried to calm me down, telling me I was doing the best I could, I simply didn't believe him. For me, it wasn't enough. I felt constantly indebted to my son, to my family, to the expectations I had created about what it meant to be a mother. Thaisa, my sister-in-law, had 2 children and seemed like an exemplary mother. She always knew what to do and had quick answers for any situation. When Daniel cried, she gave me advice with the certainty of someone who already knew the solution to every problem. Every mistake I made me feel even further away from the mother I thought I should be. I began comparing myself to her, and this only increased my frustration. I looked at her children, happy and calm, and asked myself, why can't I do the same? Comparison prevented me from seeing that every motherhood journey is unique and that I didn't need to fit anyone's mold. The sleepless nights were a factor that worsened the situation. Daniel woke up frequently, and I found myself unable to get him to sleep for more hours at a time. I was constantly exhausted, physically and emotionally, and this only increased my stress. I felt like I'd lost control of the situation. I'd look at the clock while he cried, thinking I was failing, that there was something I wasn't doing right. Each cry was a reminder that I didn't know how to soothe him, and this created enormous frustration. The pressure to be the perfect mother was destroying me internally. I felt lost, as if I were in a sea of uncertainty, unsure of which direction to take. I tried to be patient, but fatigue and anxiety caused me to fail repeatedly. I couldn't understand why everything seemed so difficult. I wanted more than anything to connect with my son in a natural and loving way, but the fear of making mistakes was paralyzing me. Motherhood wasn't a field of flowers, but rather an arduous and challenging journey. I was beginning to realize that I didn't know how to be the mother I wanted to be, and that was distressing. I wondered, would all of this really be what I imagined? I wanted to free myself from the guilt, the constant comparison, but I didn't know how to begin. I felt lost, afraid I was doing everything wrong, unsure of how to move forward. Worst of all was the mental toll. I felt completely exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. When Daniel finally got some sleep, my mind remained active, processing the mistakes I felt I had made. I couldn't turn off the guilt button. I constantly questioned whether he was receiving the right affection and care, whether he was growing healthily, whether my way of mothering was impacting his development. There was no respite. Every minute felt like a test. Every choice seemed to be watched and judged, both by myself and by others. And what hurt me most was that I was lost in this spiral of self-demand. What was supposed to be a time of unconditional love, motherhood, turned into an internal battle that seemed never-ending. I began to become increasingly withdrawn, unsure how to deal with what was happening to me. I could no longer speak openly to Felipe about what I was feeling because I thought he wouldn't understand the emotional burden I was carrying. He seemed to handle everything more calmly, and I felt powerless in the face of his calmness. I would see him with Daniel and wonder, what am I doing wrong? Our conversations became more tense. When he tried to support me, telling me I was doing the best I could, I felt he didn't understand how hard it was. I wanted him to know how hard I was trying, but at the same time, I couldn't express it clearly. The comparisons to Thaisa were also relentless. I saw her as a calm mother who seemed to have everything under control. She always had a word of advice, a solution for every situation. But as I followed her advice, something didn't feel right. I felt out of place, as if I were trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. The worst part was that the comparison wasn't just between Thaisa and me, but also between me and other mothers. Every story I heard, every account from a friend or family member, made me think I was far from being a good mother. Was it just me that motherhood was so difficult? I couldn't shake this feeling of inadequacy. Each new comparison made me doubt my abilities even more. At the same time, my family's visits began to weigh more heavily. My mother, father, and even my sister began offering more opinions about what I should or shouldn't do. Each piece of advice felt like a disguised criticism. When my mother said I should be more patient, or when my father suggested I be more relaxed, I felt more pressured, as if I were doing everything wrong. All they saw was a daughter who was trying, but wasn't doing enough. It made me sad and frustrated, and I didn't know how to make them understand what I was going through. But instead, each visit, each piece of advice, made me feel like I was failing. This created a distance between us, a disconnect that only deepened my feelings of inadequacy. The impact of this was profound. I no longer knew who I was within my own family. The expectations of me seemed to multiply. I didn't know if I was being a daughter, a wife, or a mother, because all these roles were overlapping in a confusing way. I began to lose myself in the quest to be an idealized version of myself. I tried to be a good wife to Felipe, a good daughter to my parents, and at the same time, a perfect mother to Daniel. But in trying to please everyone, I ended up distancing myself from myself. I no longer knew who I was or what I wanted. Conversations with my mother became tense. I just wanted to find my own path, but instead, I was drowning in a sea of insecurities and fears. And it was at that point that I began to realize something needed to change. I didn't know exactly what to do, but I knew I couldn't continue this cycle. I was disconnecting from everything that mattered. I needed to find a way to reconnect with myself, to understand that being a mother didn't mean being perfect, that I could be good enough without needing to fit into a mold. Only then did I begin to understand that to take good care of Daniel, I first needed to take care of myself. It was in that moment of anguish, when I felt completely overwhelmed, that something inside me began to shift. I didn't know how, but the pain of that constant pressure began to show me a path. I realized that to be a good mother, I didn't need to be perfect, nor meet every expectation others had of me. I needed to listen to myself more and understand what truly worked for me and Daniel. With that, the need to let go of external expectations began to take shape. The search for answers outside myself had made me lose focus on what truly mattered: my relationship with my son and Felipe. Comparing myself to other mothers and receiving unsolicited advice were blinding me to my own inner wisdom. I decided to take a step back and try to free myself from the pressure of being a perfect mother. Little by little, I realized that motherhood didn't have to be one size fits all. Every mother is unique, and every baby has their own needs. This realization was a relief. I just needed to be true to myself. It was difficult at first because the internal pressure still lingered, but each day I made a greater effort to connect with what truly mattered: my bond with Daniel and my emotional well-being. I dedicated myself to understanding his needs, his signals, and to stopping trying to control everything around me. And at the same time, I realized I was allowing myself to be vulnerable. This vulnerability was an important turning point, as it gave me the space to accept that I wouldn't always have all the answers. It was also at this moment that I began to see Felipe differently. I began to realize how dedicated he was to making our family work. He didn't need to pressure me to improve. He was there to support me, like a partner. Our connection, which had previously felt a little distant due to tension, began to strengthen. I began to understand that he was also going through his own challenges, and that mutual support was essential to our journey as parents. By allowing myself to be more honest with myself, my relationship with Felipe also transformed, and we both gained more space to support each other more genuinely. Our communication became more open, and we were finally able to talk about what we were feeling without fear of judgment. What gave me the strength to move forward was this recognition that I didn't have to fight alone. No matter how hard I tried to be strong, the people around me were also a fundamental part of this journey. I wasn't alone in my pain, and this made me understand that when we seek strength in community, we become more resilient. I began to value sharing with other mothers, with friends, with my own family. They were there to share experiences, to listen to me, to support me. And over time, I realized that I could also be a source of support for other women going through the same difficulties. This was liberating. I didn't have to carry all the weight alone. Even though I was finding a path to self-knowledge and acceptance, there was one issue that still weighed heavily on me: my family environment. The veiled criticism, the unsolicited opinions, and especially Thaisa's attitude were directly affecting our peace. The constant family visits, which had previously seemed like displays of affection, began to turn into moments of tension. Every time my sister-in-law came, she brought with her an attitude of superiority, as if she always knew what was best for my son. And worst of all, my family endorsed this. Felipe and I talked several times about how all of this was wearing us down. Our choices as parents were constantly disrespected. After this episode, Felipe took a step that would completely change our lives. He suggested we move. At first, the idea scared me. Moving to another city, breaking away from the family structure that had always surrounded us, seemed too radical. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt it was necessary. We were trying to build a safe, healthy, and loving environment for Daniel, and that simply wasn't possible with so much outside interference. With great regret, we decided to talk to the family and communicate our decision. It was a difficult conversation. The move itself was painful. Packing up our lives, leaving behind the places that were part of our history, was like closing a cycle, but it was also the beginning of another. We found a simple house in a quieter neighborhood with lots of greenery, away from family pressures. The first few days were silent, but this silence was liberating. There were no more comparisons, no judgmental looks, no hidden comments. Felipe and I reconnected more deeply. Daniel began sleeping better. For the first time since his birth, I allowed myself to breathe. I began to create our routine in our own way, without feeling inadequate. I felt in control of my space and my decisions. Motherhood then became lighter, more human, more my own. It was in this new environment that I truly began to blossom. I began to take care of myself more lovingly, without guilt. I returned to doing the little things that brought me pleasure: reading a book, walking with Daniel in the stroller at sunset, cooking leisurely. I rediscovered a version of myself that had been stifled for so long. Felipe also seemed lighter. We began to laugh more, to talk more. Tensions gave way to complicity. Decisions about our son's upbringing began to be made together, calmly, without external pressure. I began to notice how Daniel's presence, in a peaceful environment, reflected this too. He smiled more, played more freely. It was in this space that we began to understand that family is not about obligation, but about bonding and mutual respect. This change ultimately wasn't just physical. It was a profound transformation in the way I saw myself, how I positioned myself in the world. I began to value my own perceptions and instincts more. I stopped seeking validation from others. I stopped wanting to be a perfect mother because I understood that my son needed a real mother, with flaws, with doubts, but present and loving. I learned to silence the noise of external voices to hear my own voice. Motherhood reborn me, not as an unattainable ideal, but as a whole woman, more self-aware. When I look back today, I don't see weakness. I see strength. I see a woman who had the courage to break away from what wasn't good for her, who knew how to build a new story with her own hands. Time passed, and with it came other phases of motherhood, each with its own challenges, of course. But there was one fundamental difference. Now I felt more whole. I was no longer afraid of making mistakes, because I understood that making mistakes is part of the process. I began to accept my limitations and, with that, became a mother more connected to my son. I learned to ask for help without feeling ashamed, to say I don't know without feeling less capable, to trust my instincts even when they contradicted what others said. I saw a different pride in Felipe's eyes, as if he knew the woman before him had undergone a rebirth. Our conversations gained more depth. We learned to laugh at the small failures, to celebrate the small victories, to recognize that family life is made up of trials, adjustments, and a lot of love. Over time, my relationship with my family of origin also changed. It wasn't immediate, nor was it free of conflict, but the physical distance helped create an important emotional space. Thaisa, for example, still tried to maintain contact in the first few months, but I could tell she, too, was rethinking her stance. In a phone call months later, she apologized for not respecting my boundaries. That touched me. It wasn't about revenge or resentment. It was about healing. And my mother, though reluctant at first, began to understand that my distancing wasn't a rejection of her, but rather a cry for autonomy. Little by little, we began to rebuild bridges, this time with more respect. Motherhood taught me to say enough firmly, but also to forgive with a clean heart. Today, when I look at Daniel running around the house, smiling with the lightness of someone being raised in a home filled with true love, I feel a peace I can't explain. He won't remember all the nights I cried in silence or the times I thought about giving up. This story isn't about a superhero who overcame everything alone. It's about an ordinary woman made of fears, dreams, flaws, and loves, who decided one day to choose herself, who understood that taking care of yourself isn't selfish, it's survival, and that motherhood isn't a stage for perfection, but a journey that transforms us completely. Today, more than ever, I understand that family isn't just blood, but affection, conscious choices, and respect. My new home, far from pressure and closer to myself, is living proof that it's possible to build, brick by brick, a home where you can breathe in peace. And this home isn't just physical, it's also emotional. It's within me. It's in the space where I finally allowed myself to blossom. If you're reading this story and feel overwhelmed, suffocated by expectations and judgments, I want to tell you, you're not alone. Maybe you're, like I was, feeling like you need to fit into a mold of perfection. But I assure you, there's strength in being imperfect. There's beauty in making mistakes and trying again. There's power in saying, this doesn't work for me, and starting over if necessary. The journey may seem long, but there's light on the other side. And even if you're still in the midst of chaos, trust me, this chaos is also fertile. It can be the beginning of your rebuilding. I'm not the same woman I was before, and as painful as the path to get here has been, I'm deeply grateful for it. Because today, finally, I'm a mother, I'm a woman, I'm whole, and that's enough.